this government back operating again, to end the negative impact, the real hardship that so many people across this country are experiencing. Thank you very much. Madam President, I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Vermont.
Madam President, in Vermont and all over this country, there is profound anger and disgust at what's going on here in Washington. And the reason for that is that today we remain in a significant and very serious economic downturn. Real unemployment is close to 14%. Over 20 million workers are unemployed. And what the American people are saying as loudly and as clearly as they can is, Congress, we want you to create millions of decent-paying jobs. All over this country, people are struggling with wages of $9 or $10 an hour. And what the American people are saying to Congress is, Congress, Mr. President, we want you to raise the minimum wage. So in the midst of a serious economic crisis, the American people want us to act to improve the economy, to create jobs, to raise wages. But what are we doing today? We are saying to 800,000 hardworking federal employees, don't come into work, and we don't know when and if you are going to be paid. We are saying to 1.2 million other federal employees who are at work, thank you very much for coming into your job today. Thank you for your work as a Capitol Hill police officer or an FBI agent or somebody in the CIA or somebody working at Head Start or somebody delivering meals to low-income senior citizens. Thank you all very much for your work, but we don't know when and if you will be paid. So what we are doing is right now the exact opposite of what the American people want. They want us to create jobs and raise wages, and what we are doing is saying to 2 million American workers, you're not getting paid. Some of you are furloughed, some of you are coming in. These federal employees, they're not millionaires. They are hard-working, middle-class Americans. They are struggling like everybody else in this country to pay their mortgages, to send their kids to college, to afford child care, to do the other things that middle-class families need to do. And we are putting all of them under extreme anxiety today. And in an unstable, volatile economy, that is not what we should be doing. But in addition to that, Mr. President, we are also having a very negative impact. This shutdown is having a very negative impact on the entire economy. The estimate is that we are losing about $10 billion a week as a result of the government shutdown, according to Goldman Sachs. If the government is shut down for 3 weeks, the economy will lose over $36 billion. Over $36 billion. Moody's has estimated that if the shutdown lasts 4 weeks, it will drain $55 billion from the economy. Does any sane person believe that when our economy today has so many problems, when we are just beginning to recover from the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, when we were losing 700,000 jobs a month, when we're trying to get our feet on the ground economically, does anybody think it makes sense to not be paying over 2 million workers and to be losing billions and billions of dollars in the economy as a result of the shutdown? Mr. President, this is the start of the flu season. Every fall, the Centers for Disease Control closely monitors the spread of flu and directs vaccines to where they are needed the most. But because of the shutdown, the CDC is today unable to support the annual season influenza program. Does that make sense to anybody? We are endangering the health and the lives of millions of Americans because of the shutdown of the CDC. During the shutdown, the Food and Drug Administration is stopping most of its food safety operations. We have seen over the years outbreaks of salmonella and other types of food problems. Does anyone think it makes sense to shut down the FDA? Most of the Department of Labor is closed. Ironically, we are supposed to be receiving a report from the Department of Labor telling us what kind of unemployment rate we now have, but we can't get that because they're shut down. The WIC program, Women, Infants, and Children Nutrition Program, is being shut down. This is a program that provides good nutrition to low-income pregnant women and their babies so that the mothers and the babies will be healthy in these critical times in their lives. We want healthy children in this country. We don't want to see children die at birth. That's what the WIC program is about. Social Security services are being delayed. In Burlington, Vermont, where I live, there was a rally just yesterday. Social Security workers are being furloughed. Others are working without pay. We owe it to the seniors in this country that when they are eligible for Social Security and they apply for Social Security, that their papers are processed in a timely manner. That's what they are due. Head Start programs for thousands of lower-income kids are starting to close. Today, Head Start provides education, health, nutrition, and other services to roughly 1 million children throughout our country. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday of the impact the shutdown is already having. 4 Head Start programs that offer preschool activities for 3,200 children in Florida, Connecticut, Alabama, and Mississippi have closed. And officials said 11 other programs would be shut down by week's end if federal funding isn't restored. Does any sane person believe that we should be shutting down Head Start programs at a time when preschool education is so important? We all understand that, and it's so hard to come by. So what we are telling parents today is next week you may not be able to bring your kid into a Head Start program. How does that impact your employment? What do you do with your kid? Does anybody around here care about that? Mr. President, let me conclude just simply by saying this. The United States is the only nation in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care to all people. Today we have about 48 million people with no health insurance. Obamacare, to my mind, is not a solution to the problem, but it is a step forward. We're talking about 20, maybe 25 million people who are in desperate need of health insurance, being able to get that insurance, others who are paying more than they can afford, perhaps getting insurance which is more affordable to them. We should be going further in terms of health care. But for right-wing Republicans in the House of Representatives to be saying that we are going to keep this government shut down until we deny millions of people the health care based on legislation that we passed is inexcusable. It is not acceptable. Now, the point I think that many of my colleagues have made, and everybody agrees with now, this is not in debate, and the American people have got to understand this. Number one, the Senate passed a continuing resolution that, in my view, simply underfunds many of the programs that are out there. I am not happy about that bill. It should be much higher than that. It's not a good bill. But it was passed. Now, everybody understands that if Speaker Boehner chose to be the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives and not the Speaker of the Republican Party, and if he brought that bill that we passed here in the Senate on the floor this morning, there is no debate. They have the votes. The Democrats and moderate Republicans, and maybe more, would vote for that legislation, and government could be reopened this afternoon. So the Speaker there has an issue that he's got to deal with, and that he has got to understand that he represents all of this country and not just an extreme right-wing faction. And I hope very much the Speaker will do the right thing, bring that bill to the floor, and reopen the United States government. Thank you. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
I want to follow up just briefly first on Senator Sanders' comments. You know, we have a continuing resolution over there. The annualized cut is $70 billion. Usually when you compromise, one side gives a little, the other side gives a little. On this continuing resolution that passed out of this body, we took their numbers. Compromise usually means a little bit from both sides. We took 100% their numbers of the House. $70 billion annualized cut. That's what we took. So people who keep saying that we're not negotiating, we did. Matter of fact, went much further than many of us wanted, but we did it because we wanted to keep the government open. And so let's not get fooled by some of the political speeches that they're making on the floor or over there on the outside in the courtyard. We met their annualized reduction that they wanted, $70 billion, with this continuing resolution. When they have sent bills over here, we have voted on them. They have not prevailed on their side, but we have voted on them. We sent the bill over there. It's sitting. We know by public statements by many Republicans and Democrats over there, they're ready to vote on this bill. Clean, CR, continuing resolution to keep the government open. What's amazing about this is as we're debating this, what we should be getting back to, and I know my chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Senator Mikulski, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, you know, we'd like to get back to appropriations annual bills, because then we won't be in this start and stop deal here that I think the American people are fed up with. These manufactured crises by a few over in the House have set us up in a situation where we create more uncertainty in the economy, more uncertainty in families and small businesses, individual employees of the federal government who are now on furlough. You know, 80% of my staff is on furlough. Every day they're on furlough, I donate my salary. I'm doing my part because we shouldn't be exempt from this situation, but at the same time, we have to recognize the impact that it's having to our economy. And I get it, you know, they're passionate about their view on the Affordable Health Care Act. They don't like it, some of them over there. Some of them also have said we should work to fix it. I propose multiple solutions and ideas on how we can move forward on that. But to hold up the economy, hold up the budget over this issue is ridiculous. I mean, I don't like No Child Left Behind. I hate it. For Alaska, it doesn't work. It destroyed many efforts in our rural communities. But to hold up the government over that, I'm going to work to fix it. And if I can't fix it, I'll vote against the reauthorization. That's the right that we have here. But they're playing, and I called it last night, Russian roulette economics. That's what they're doing. And the American people are the ones on the back end. And it's shameful. We have to get back to doing what we should be doing here. Annualize appropriation bills, create certainty in the economy, create certainty in our government, focus on this economy that has moved for 4 or 5 years now out of a recession, a great recession. It's a slow climb out, but we're in the right direction. Let's keep it moving that direction with the right kind of policies. You know, I know in my state now the winter is setting in. Low-income housing assistance program is critical for Alaskans who live in areas that their income is not able to purchase the energy that they need to supply for their house for the winter heat, and they depend on the low-income housing energy assistance program. It is not about some fluff program or some luxury program. It's, for them, life and death. If you can't heat your home in Alaska when it's 30 below, you may not survive. It's that simple. When I said earlier that I think the members on the other side clearly understand that we have to get the government running, and there are members on both sides that are ready to do that over there if the Speaker would just put it on the table so people could vote on it. And if it fails, then we'll be back to negotiations. My bet is it won't fail because it passed here. People forget that the cloture vote here, the vote to move the bill forward here in the Senate, passed 99-0. 99-0. I'm not sure when that's happened recently around this place, but we did it after great passionate speeches by some. But we did it. We debated it. We moved the bill over because it's the right thing to do. And again, reminding people we met the House numbers. we didn't lift our numbers up or down. We went all the way down to their number. $70 billion in cuts in annualized savings, annualized cuts to the federal budget on this 6-week or so continuing resolution. In Anchorage, we estimate about the columnist just wrote, about 13,000 federal workers are in some form or another impacted by this. May they be laid off or impacted because they're working longer hours with no pay. I want to detail just a couple examples in Alaska where it's impacting. You take this federal worker who's now been furloughed. They were in the midst of remodeling their home. I got this call and everything stopped. The contractors who are expected to get paid, they're not getting paid. The contractors working for that employee who was remodeling their home, now that won't happen because of the uncertainty. And his comment was, I thought, pretty clear. Life doesn't stop just because Congress says you can't come to work anymore. Life continues on, and these costs pile up. In my state, the Bering Sea crab fisheries, many people see this on the TV shows, The Deadliest Catch. This industry is worth about $80 million a year, but it is critical that what we call the quotas, the amount of crab they can catch, is determined by NOAA, federal agencies, NOAA's fisheries, and the state of Alaska. The crab season starts October 15th. If they do not have these quotas set, making sure that the process is safe and the product is exactly what people expect when they get it on their food or on their plate to eat or at the grocery store, the problem is those employees are furloughed. So the quota won't be set. These permits that they need to catch the crab will not happen. The end result is a multi-million-dollar hit, not to some government employee. I know I've heard people criticizing bureaucrats and all that. Well, not only plus million or so employees are furloughed across this country, now it's affecting second and third options, in this case the crab industry, which will affect people all over this country and all over this world. Again, delay after delay. Alaska receives about $1.2 billion in federal payroll every single year. A lengthy disruption will have an incredible fiscal impact to our state and will trickle out because these folks travel. They travel to many of my colleagues' states here. I see my senator colleague from Washington State. We have lots of people that go to Seattle and Washington State. They may not take that trip. They may not spend in that economy because they're afraid of what might happen or this stop-and-go situation. We're now about to move forward after decades of waiting to move forward on the National Petroleum Reserve for oil and gas exploration. But what does it take? Well, it's a federal reserve. So it takes federal permits. Without the federal permits, it can't happen, or it gets delayed and is costly. Again, when you look at these issues and the calls that I've received, all the way from an elder in the Arctic Circle just saying, please get the people back to work. It has direct impact to not only Alaskans, but people all across this country. When I think about this issue, and there's a lot of great debate, and yesterday I saw a press conference done by a small group of the minority over there concerned about the National Institute of Health. I'm concerned about the National Institute of Health. I can tell you story after story where those medicines are critical for young people and adults. But what they failed to mention was the billions they've already cut. They forgot that little detail. Amnesia is like a prerequisite with some members around here, and they forgot that little detail. It's amazing to me. They also forgot, as I mentioned now several times, and I'll mention again because I think the public has not heard this enough, because they say over there they're not negotiating. We have. We've taken their numbers, gone all the way down by $70 billion annualized cuts. We've taken them for this continuing resolution. Every time they send something over here, we voted on it. They may not have liked the vote outcome, but we voted on it. We send one bill over there. Well, I should say one continuing resolution. We do have the Farm Bill over there, the Immigration Bill, the WRDA bill. It's piled up over there for them not taking action because they rather play party politics and figure out what elections they can win or lose rather than focusing on what's important for the American people and for my constituency in Alaska specifically that I represent. So, Mr. President, I hope that we end this debate, get on with the business, open the government back up, let's negotiate. They have some ideas to fix the Health Care Act, I'm happy to talk with them. I have several bills that I've introduced, but I've never heard from them over there. Matter of fact, I know they mention my name quite a bit over there. I've seen it on TV. The House somehow recognizes that I have some influence, and I do in certain ways, but they want to have some conversation. I'm game. Pick up the phone or walk across the Capitol. But let's be real. The continuing resolution is about managing our budget and putting people back to work so we can keep this economy moving and get on with the big issues that we have to deal with. If you want to fix the Health Care Act, I'm happy to sit down with members. If you want to move the immigration bill, I'm happy to work with folks. You can go through the list. But let's not hold the American people hostage for a simple situation where if they put it on the floor, it would pass. I will bet on it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, yesterday we had a hearing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The gentleman, the presiding officer, knows. And we had testimony by Secretary Sherman as to the enforcement of sanctions against Iran in order to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state, which would be a game changer. And during the course of that hearing, it came out that as a result of the government shutdown, we are not as effective as we could be, that there's always more that can be done in working with other countries, and that the shutdown is affecting our full preparedness for enforcing the sanctions internationally against Iran. Now, one of my colleagues started to challenge the representative from the State Department as to why they couldn't do more, and of course it was the Treasury Department's budget that was primarily affecting the attention here. And the Secretary assured us that we are enforcing our sanctions. Senator Kaine made the observation, and the right observation, don't blame the administration, blame the Congress. It's the Congress that has the responsibility to make sure that government is functioning on all cylinders. And this Tea Party shutdown is jeopardizing our national security. It is not putting us where we should be as far as taking care of the needs of the people of this country. We've talked, I was on the floor a couple of days ago, and I quoted from the Baltimore Sun as to the responsibility for the shutdown, and I'm going to quote a little bit more from that article. It said, it would be tempting, this is a quote from the Baltimore Sun, it would be tempting, of course, to write that this impasse, the inability to agree on the continuing resolution to fund government past the end of the fiscal year, was the fault of Democrats and Republicans alike, but that would be like blaming the hostages for causing the perpetrator to put a gun to their head. As President Obama noted, he and congressional Democrats put forward no agenda other than keeping government operating temporarily at the current levels. I just want to review for how we got here on October 1, because it was 6 months ago that the Senate passed a budget. It was different than the House budget. And then we, the Democrats, said, let's go to conference. That's what we should do. Let's negotiate a budget so that when it comes to October 1, we have a budget in place to fund government at the levels that we agreed to, Democrats and Republicans. The Republicans refused to go to conference. Fast forward to October 1st. We didn't have a budget, and therefore it was necessary to pass a continuing resolution. That's what you do. If you can't pass a budget, you keep government operating at the current levels until you can agree on a budget. So that's what we decided to do. But we went further. The majority leader met with the Speaker of the House. And rather than negotiating between what level we thought the continuing resolution, the Democrats thought, and the Republicans thought, we went along with the lower number. We negotiated the continuing resolution at the lower level. And that is what we passed. But the Republicans in the House decided that they would not go for that, and they attached their changes in the health care system as a condition to passing a continuing resolution. Make no mistake about it, it's a Tea Party shutdown. Now the Republicans are saying to us, why aren't we negotiating? Well, let me quote one more time from the Baltimore Sun in this morning's editorial. And this morning's editorial, I think, really captures where we are as far as negotiations. The headline says, there is no room to negotiate with extremists that take the federal government hostage and threaten to do the same to the economy. I'm quoting. How can the Tea Partiers in the House expect to be offered anything for doing the equivalent of strapping C4 and a detonator to their chest and holding the government hostage? The editorial goes on to say, and I quote, rewarding these tactics, and you will only see more of it in Congress. And that's critically important given that the stakes are about to rise. Should Republicans engage in similar behavior with the debt ceiling, they risk not only the health of the U.S. economy, but the global economy. To default on a debt, to refuse to pay bills already incurred by the federal government has the potential to pull the nation back into a recession and put thousands, if not millions, of people out of work. So, Mr. President, it's very clear. We have compromised, and the Tea Party Republicans have shut down government. You can't negotiate with a gun to your head. You know, it reminds me of a football team that played a game and didn't like the results and says, let's just play that game all over again. You know, last Sunday, the Baltimore Ravens didn't play a very good game. They lost. They didn't say, let's play that game over again. They're going to be here next week, this weekend, playing again, trying to improve their record. I heard one of my colleagues use another sports analogy, saying we could do a mulligan on Obamacare. Well, let me tell you, we're the big leagues. There's no mulligans at the U.S. Open. There's no mulligans in golf. Let's use the regular order. Yes, we want to negotiate a budget for the next year, but you can't do it with a gun at your head, open government, pay our bills. So then the Republicans are saying, well, let's do this piecemeal. Why don't we just take up small provisions? Well, let me quote again from the Baltimore Sun this morning. Even the little fixes the GOP is offering are outrageous if they slow down the return of a fully funded government. Reopening parks would be great, but what about cancer patients denied treatment? Or for every National Institute of Health reopened, what about the funding for inspectors that are making sure our food isn't tainted? Or intelligence officers monitoring the next al-Qaeda attack? Or FDA scientists reviewing the next miracle drug? It's impossible to even keep track of all the hardships that the shutdown has created. And why do so when the solution is at hand? End quote. This shutdown has hurt our country. My colleagues have talked about it. It's made America, it's affected our welfare, it's put our nations at risk, it's hurt our economy in my own state of Maryland. And I know Senator Mikulski is here, and she's going to be speaking, chairman of the Appropriations Committee. $15 million a day, every day is lost in our state economy. We have hundreds of thousands, literally over 100,000 workers who are on furlough, not getting paid. And it's costing the taxpayers money. The last shutdown in 1995 cost $2 billion. What a waste of taxpayers' resources. So let us put an end to this Tea Party shutdown. Let us also assure those who are on furlough that they'll get paid. I've introduced legislation in this regard. I believe the House is going to be passing that legislation. Let's make it clear that our federal workers who've endured 3 years of pay freezes, furloughs under sequestration, asked to do more with less, that they'll be made whole when this shutdown ends. So, into the shutdown, let's make sure we pay our bills. And yes, let us meet together to work out a budget for the coming year as we should. The tragedy here, Mr. President, is that the votes are in the House of Representatives to pass the Senate continuing resolution. If Speaker Boehner would just vote on the resolution we passed over, the shutdown could end and we could get on to the business of this nation. With that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I had intended to give remarks and then promulgate a series of unanimous consent requests. However, the Majority Leader requested for purposes of scheduling that I begin with the unanimous consent request, which I'm happy to do so to accommodate his schedule. But I would ask that at the conclusion of these unanimous consent requests, I would ask unanimous consent that I be given 20 minutes to speak at the conclusion of this to lay out the reasons why I believe the majority should accede to these unanimous requests.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
So the first unanimous consent request I would promulgate, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.J. Res. 72, making continuing appropriations for veterans' benefits for the fiscal year 2014, which was received from the House. I ask further consent that the measure be read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. The junior senator from Texas has offered a unanimous consent that we take care of veterans in this shutdown of government. Mr. President, I would note that there is no senator or member of Congress here who doesn't care deeply about making sure that our veterans are taken care of, including this senator from the state of Washington. As the presiding officer knows and our colleagues know, I have spoken often of my own father, who was a World War II veteran, who spent most of his life in a wheelchair, earned a Purple Heart. I know the sacrifices that our veterans make. As chair of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee before this, I fought hard to make sure every veteran had what they needed, that we said more than just thank you, but we provided them for what they need. So I know our veterans well. And what I do know about our veterans, Mr. President, is that they, above everyone else, are selfless. They went to serve our country and said, we will take care of the rest of you at our own personal sacrifice. They would be the last to come before us and say, take care of me before everyone else. They would say to us, take care of our fellow men and leave no one behind. So, Mr. President, I am going to ask that the senator modify his request and do what our military has always asked us to, their fellow men to do, and leave no one behind. A request that will assure that everyone who fights for our country, takes care of our country, works for our country in emergencies, depends on our country to make sure that they have the opportunity every one of us had here, is able to have that opportunity and they're not held hostage to a government shutdown so that we can get back to work and solve our country's problems. We need to end this Tea Party shutdown, and we can do it with the request that I will ask right now. So I have a modification to suggest to the junior senator from Texas request. I ask consent that his request be modified as follows, that an amendment, which is at the desk, be agreed to, that the joint resolution as amended then be read a 3rd time and passed, and the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. This amendment is the text that has passed the Senate and is a clean, continuing resolution for the entire government, and is something that is already over in the House and reportedly has now the support of the majority of the members of the House of Representatives.
Does the senator from Texas so modify his request?
Reserving the right to object, I thank my friend from Washington State. I note that she talked about leaving no man or woman behind. And I would note that the continuing resolution that the House has passed to fully fund the Veterans Administration treats our veterans the same way the House and Senate have already treated active duty military. Just a few days ago, this body unanimously passed a bill that said the men and women of the military would be paid. Unfortunately, it seems to be the position of the majority in this body that veterans should be treated not as well as our active duty military, and in particular that the full funding of the VA should be held hostage to every other priority that the Democrats in this chamber must have. I understand the Democrats in this chamber are committed to Obamacare with all of their heart, might, and soul. But the veterans of this nation should not be held hostage to that commitment. It is likely, given the majority's refusal to negotiate, refusal to compromise, refusal even to talk to find a middle ground, it is likely that this shutdown instigated by the Democratic majority will continue for some time. And during that time, we ought to be able to find common ground that at the very minimum, our veterans shouldn't pay the price. If moments from now, my friend from Washington simply does not object, by the end of the day, the VA will be fully funded. If, as we all expect, she does object, if she repeats the objection that her majority leader and her party has made throughout the course of this week, then much of the VA will remain shut down because of that objection. So she has asked if we can reopen the entire federal government, and if she doesn't get if the request is not granted to give every single priority in the federal government that the majority party wants, that the VA will remain without sufficient funds. I find that highly objectionable, and I object.
Is there objection to the original request?
Mr. President, I object on behalf of all Americans who should not be left behind.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, the second unanimous consent request I would promulgate. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 3230, making continuing appropriations during a government shutdown to provide pay and allowances for members of the reserve components of the armed forces, which was received from the House. I ask further consent that the measure be read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Mr. President, the junior senator from Texas launched this government shutdown with a 21-hour presentation here on the floor of the United States Senate, and it is clear from the actions of the House and his actions today that he is starting to try to reconcile in his mind all the damage which this government shutdown, which he inspired, is causing across the United States. This particular unanimous consent request relates to the National Guard and Reservists, a group which we hold in high esteem. But if the gentleman from Texas is really focused on veterans and those who have served our country, take into consideration the 560,000 federal employees who are currently facing furlough or on furlough, who are veterans, a fourth of whom are disabled veterans. So what the junior senator from Texas is doing is picking and choosing those he will allow in the lifeboat. At this moment, it's National Guard and Reserve. Leave 560,000 veteran federal employees out in the water thrashing for themselves. That is not the way we should manage or govern this country. I can understand the anxiety you feel about the problems you have created, but trying to solve them one piece at a time is not the American way. I object. And I ask unanimous consent, though, before I object. I ask unanimous consent that your request be modified, that an amendment which is at the desk be agreed to, that the bill be amended, then be read a 3rd time and passed, motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. This amendment is the text that passed the Senate, is a clean, continuing resolution for the entire government, National Guard, Reserve, VA, NIH, all of them. It's something that's already over in the House of Representatives and reportedly has the support of a majority of Democrats and Republicans and could pass today. I ask for that modification.
Will the Senator so modify his request?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. No one watching these proceedings should be confused. We are in a shutdown because President Obama and the majority leader of this body want a shutdown because they believe it is in the partisan interest of their party to have a shutdown. 4 times the House of Representatives has compromised. 4 times the House of Representatives has endeavored to meet a middle ground, and 4 times the majority leader and every Democrat in this body has said, no, we will not talk, we will not compromise, we will not have a middle ground. 100% of the priorities of the Democrats in this body must be funded, or they will insist on a shutdown. Now, I thank my friend from Illinois for making clear that the members of the reserve components of our armed forces, in his judgment, are not worthy of being paid during this shutdown that the Democrats have forced. I could not disagree with that judgment more strongly. And let us be clear. This bill that has passed the House doesn't mention Obamacare, has nothing to do with Obamacare. It simply says the exact same thing that my friend from Illinois already agreed to, which is that the active duty men and women of the military would not be held hostage and would be paid if it so happened that the Democrats forced a shutdown. Now, apparently the position of the majority of this body is that we've got a double standard, that reserve members are not treated as well as active duty members, that reserve members will not get their paychecks. And let's be clear that this bill could be on the President's desk for signature today if my friend from Illinois would simply withdraw his objection. Unfortunately, in a move that I think reflects a level of cynicism not befitting of the responsibility all of us have, my friend is prepared to object and to say that not just veterans, but reserve members shall be held hostage in order to force Obamacare on the American people. That is the objective. I guess now the Democratic Party has become the party of Obamacare, by Obamacare, and for Obamacare all of the time. And every other priority recedes. So veterans are told, your concerns do not matter unless we can use you to force Obamacare on the American people. Reserve military members are told, your concerns do not matter unless we can use you as a hostage to force Obamacare on the American people. Mr. President, that's cynical. We ought to take these individuals off the table. I would note that my friend from Illinois noted the great many federal employees who had been furloughed. I would be very happy to work in a bipartisan manner to cooperate with my friend from Illinois to bring a great many of those federal employees back to their vital responsibilities. But unfortunately, the position the Democratic Party has made is not a one of them will be allowed to come back until this body agrees to force Obamacare on the American people, despite the jobs lost, despite the people being forced into part-time work, despite the skyrocketing health insurance premiums, and despite the millions of people losing or at risk of losing their health insurance. Mr. President, I find that highly objectionable, and I object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Mr. President, I would say to my colleague from Texas, some of the language which he has used in this debate relative to impugning the motives of other members may have crossed the line. I'm not going to raise it at this point, but I ask him to be careful in the future. I object.
Objection is heard. For the edification of all senators, Rule 19 reads as follows. No senator in debate shall directly or indirectly by any form of words impute to another senator or to other senators any conduct or motive unworthy of becoming or unbecoming a senator.
Mr. President, I now promulgate my third unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.J. Res. 70, making continuing appropriations for National Park Service operations, which was received from the House. I ask further consent that the measure be read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object.
Senator from New York.
Mr. President, and I will object, but let me just say a couple of things here. First, in reference to the colloquy he had with the senator from Texas had with my good friend from Washington State, he said that he notes that the senator from Washington talks about leaving no man or no woman behind. She does indeed. And that is one of the reasons so many of us oppose this piecemeal approach. It's leaving lots of people behind. The bottom line is the junior senator from Texas is advocating shutting down the government. And now he comes before us and says, well, why don't you pass the parts of the government that I want to open? No one would want to do that. Makes no sense. Let's shut down the government, and then I'll come to the floor and be magnanimous and offer a few places where the government opens. I note that no other colleagues are standing here on the floor with him. I'd note that, at least according to press reports, most of the many conservative colleagues in this body reject this approach. And I would note that it would make no sense to shut down the government and pick a few groups. Who wants to shut the government down? In my view, Mr. President, it is the Tea Party. They've said it all along. They've advocated for it. There are countless instances where even in 2010, Tea Party folks said, let's shut the government down. And then it is said, after the government is shut down, that President Obama or this side or the senator from Illinois caused it. When we had a bipartisan resolution with a majority on this side, there was an opportunity. I believe the junior senator from Texas urged his colleagues to vote against that resolution, but 25 of them did not. And that kept the government open here in the Senate. There were many, everyone on this side, the other side of the aisle opposes Obamacare. But the majority didn't want to use a bludgeon and say, unless you reject Obamacare, we're going to shut the government down, or for that matter, not raise the debt ceiling. We are not, Mr. President, in an Alice in Wonderland world, where those who advocate shutting the government down then accuse others of shutting the government down. That isn't washing with the American people, and it won't wash in this body with the vast majority of members of both sides of the aisle. And so I would say to my colleague, if you wish to have a debate on what parts of the government should be funded and at what level, it is wrong, in my opinion, to say shut the government down and then we'll decide piece by piece which we open. That's Alice in Wonderland, in my judgment. I would rather, it makes much more sense to have the government open and then have a debate in the proper place, a conference committee that decides future funding in an omnibus appropriations bill, what level of funding, if any, each part of the government should get. So to first deprive our national parks of dollars by advocating shutting the government down, and then accuse others who don't want to leave 98% of the government behind, and of the people who work there behind, and of the American people who depend on so many other programs, whether it's student loans or feeding the hungry, is wrong. And so I would ask consent that the request be modified as follows, that an amendment which is at the desk be agreed to, that the joint resolution be amended, then be read a third time and passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate. This amendment is the text that passed the Senate and is a clean, continuing resolution for the entire government, actually leaving no man or woman behind, and is something that is already over in the House and has the support, reportedly, of a majority of members of the House, including members of both parties. So would the Senator agree to modify his request?
Does the Senator agree to so modify his request?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, I thank the Senator from New York for his heartfelt concern for the Republican Party. And I note that the Senator from New York stated that I, quote, have advocated shutting down the government. That statement, unfortunately, is a flat-out falsehood, and I know the Senator from New York would not do so knowingly, so it must have been a mistaken statement. Because throughout the course of this debate, I have said repeatedly in every context, we should not shut the government down. A shutdown is a mistake, and I very much hoped that the majority leader would not force a shutdown on this country. We are in a shutdown because the Democrats in this body have refused to negotiate, refused to compromise. And I would note as well, I am quite grateful for the majority leader's admonition this morning towards civility on the floor. and the senator from Illinois' admonition towards Rule 19. That is an admonition well heard. Indeed, it was quite striking. You know, it has been several days since I have been to the floor of the Senate, and yet I feel that I have been here in absentia because so many Democrats have invoked my name as the root of all evil in the world. And indeed, the same majority leader that gave an ode to civility just a few days ago was describing me and anyone who might agree that we should stop the harms of Obamacare, describing us as, quote, anarchists. So I think the encouragement towards civility is an encouragement that should be heard across the board. And I would note also that my friends on the Democratic side of the aisle have described what they claim to be the piecemeal approach as following my priorities. Several Democrats have used that language publicly. And I must note, Mr. President, I find it really quite ironic, because if I were to stand up here and say, it is my priority and not the priority of the Democrats to fund veterans, it is my priority and not the priority of the Democrats to fund the National Guard, it is my priority and not the priority of the Democrats to fund our national parks, it is my priority and not the priority of the Democrats to fund research for health care, they would quite rightly be able to rise and claim under Rule 19 that I was impugning their motives. I cannot imagine a greater insult than to claim it is not the priority of members of this body to treat fairly our veterans. And yet what I find so striking is that so many Democrats go out publicly and embrace that. They say funding the veterans is Cruz's priority, not ours. And yet I'll note even on that front, the funding proposals that the House of Representatives has passed are not even the House's priorities, although under the Constitution they have a legitimate role laying out their priorities for funding. They are President Obama's priorities. Just a few days ago, the President gave a speech to this country, a speech that all of us watched closely, in which the President said that if a shutdown occurred, quote, veterans who sacrifice for their country will find their support centers unstaffed. The President also said, with regard to parks, as we're discussing now, and memorials, quote, tourists will find every one of America's national parks and monuments, from Yosemite to the Smithsonian to the Statue of Liberty, immediately closed. And to the credit of the House of Representatives, they listened to the President's speech, they listened to President Obama's priorities, and the House of Representatives acted with bipartisan cooperation. They said, Mr. President, we have heard your priorities, let's fund them. Let's work together. I would note my friend from Maryland a moment ago gave a speech about how important it is, he thinks, that we should fund food inspectors in the Department of Agriculture and also our intelligence community. And I would note with my friend from Maryland, I fully agree with him and indeed would be happy to work arm in arm and to fund the intelligence community, fully fund them today. The only impediment to that happening is that the Democrats in this body are objecting. And that is what should be abundantly clear. When it comes to parks, when it comes to memorials, we've all read about World War II veterans being turned away from the World War II memorial. We've all read about Mount Vernon, which is privately owned, the federal government blocking the parking lot.
Mr. President,
Leader.
I ask permission to direct a question to the chair to my friend from Texas.
Does the senator yield for a question?
I'm happy to yield for a question from the Majority Leader.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, my question is that I was under the assumption that my friend would offer the consent agreements. We would give, as we do here, brief responses into the competing consent agreements, and then the Senate would speak for 20 minutes. My only concern is this. 1, 2, 3. I have 5 or 6 senators over here wishing to speak. So my question is this. Do you wish to take 20 minutes following this, in addition to what time you've taken now?
Senator from Texas.
I thank the Majority Leader for his question. At his request, I began with these unanimous consent requests, and it was my intention to keep my remarks at the end, but I would note that in each of the objections, my friends on the Democratic side of the aisle have chosen to stand up and give their remarks. And if the remarks are to be given by the Democrats, then it is certainly appropriate that some response be given. And so if the courtesy the Majority Leader was asking was that none of the remarks that his friends and colleagues make have any response, That was not a courtesy I was prepared to give. I was prepared to, and am prepared to work and cooperate on timing, but not to allow only one side of the discussion to be presented.
Further, Mr. President, I ask then to propound a unanimous consent request when the request this, when the senator from Texas finishes his consent that he's asking, and there's one more as I understand it, then I ask permission the next senators to be recognized. Senator Mikulski for
10 minutes.
Senator Mikulski for 10 minutes. Senator from Florida. Senator. So it's not bad. Only a couple to speak. So we have Senator Mikulski be recognized for up to 15 minutes. So I apologize for the interruption. The floor is the senators from Texas.
Without objection. Senator from Texas, is there objection to the modification?
The modification.
Is there objection to the modification of your consent request by the senator from New York?
Reserving the right to object. The modification that the senator from New York has suggested is that he is unwilling to open our national parks, to open our memorials, unless every other aspect of the government is opened immediately and Obamacare is forced upon the American people. That is, quite simply and directly saying that the Senate will not respond to President Obama's priorities. President Obama gave a speech to this country saying we should open our parks, we should open our memorials. The House of Representatives said, Mr. President, we the Republicans will work with you to do that. And today the Democrats in the Senate are objecting and saying, no, we want every park closed, every memorial closed. All of that will be held hostage until Obamacare is forced on every American. I find that highly objectionable, and I object.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
Reserving the right to object, and I'll be brief.
Senator from New York.
I just want to make this point. The junior senator from Texas has said that it is President Obama and the Democrats who are shutting the government down. My modification, which he just objected to, would open up the entire government. We put it on the floor. We're all for it. He objected to it. Therefore, I will object to the junior senators from Texas's proposal.
The objection is heard. Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, the forced unanimous consent request that I would promulgate, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.J. Res. 73, making continuing appropriations for the National Institutes of Health for fiscal year 2014. I ask further consent that the measure be read 3 times and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Prior to my responding to my friend, I would use just a few minutes of leader time, and it's very brief. With the permission, here's what I'm going to say. Mr. President, we've heard this back and forth stuff about veterans, but let's also, in addition to what the senator from Washington said, let me read one paragraph from the record of yesterday. I would also note that I believe the resolution the Senator is offering and suggested to be passed provides only partial funding for the VA. There is no funding here to operate the national cemeteries. There's no funding for the Board of Veterans' Appeals. There's no funding for constructing VA hospitals and the clinics. There's no funding actually to operate the IT system that the entire VA needs in order to continue going forward. Mr. President, I reserve the right to object to my friend from Texas' request. I object, as do most Americans. There's no reason for us to have to choose between important government functions, as has been said by my 3 colleagues so brilliantly this morning. But I guess my objection is best paraphrased by reading a column from the Washington Post by Dana Milbank. Here's what he said. House Republicans continue what might be called the lifeboat strategy, deciding which government functions are worth saving. In, veterans, the troops and tourist attractions. Out, poor children, pregnant women, and just about every government function that regulates business. Here are some of the functions not boarding the GOP lifeboats. Market regulation, chemical spill investigations, antitrust enforcement, worksite immigration checks, workplace safety inspections, the Environmental Protection Agency, communications, trade regulation, nutrition for 9 million children and pregnant women, flu monitoring, and other functions of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and housing rental assistance for the poor. Now, Mr. President, I spent a month ago a day at the National Institutes of Health. I remember so clearly one institute I went to where this young girl, about 12 years old, she had come back for a second visit. She had a disease they really didn't know for sure what it is, but they were trying to figure out what she had. And they felt that they were on the cusp of being able to figure that out. And that parents, of course, were very, very happy. Mr. President, we know how important it is that little children, babies, adults be taken care of, especially toward the time when they have no hope. That's what the NIH is about, hope. And so, Mr. President, I really believe that we should open the government, all the government. This is a trip down a road that is so foolish. We need not be there. If people have problems with Obamacare, and I know my friend, this junior senator from Texas, doesn't care for Obamacare. Let's do it in a context that's reasonable and fair, not have all the people in America who are so troubled with this. I heard an interview with the governor of Maryland this morning. They're losing $15 or $20 million a day because of the government being closed in Maryland. So, Mr. President, I would ask my friend to accept a modification, and it's a modification that is so well-intentioned. What it would do is open the government. It would take care of the National Institutes of Health. It would take care of the veterans, including all the stuff that's left out of the consent that we have here before the floor, which I read into the record a minute ago. It would take care of the national parks, which in Nevada we are really desperate to have those. We have one 7-8 minutes out of Las Vegas. We have 1 million people a year visit that. We have one about 12 miles out of Las Vegas where we have 600,000 people a year visit that. Lake Mead, the other is Red Rock, and we have a Great Basin National Park. I want to open that. Mr. President, that would solve this problem like that. So I ask consent that my friend from Texas consent be modified, that an amendment which the desk be agreed to, that the joint resolution is amended be read a third time passed, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate. This amendment is the text that passed the Senate and is a clean, continuing resolution from the entire government and is something that's already over in the House and reportedly has the support of the majority of members of the House of Representatives. Finally, Mr. President, the statement I made, that little girl, if she came back there now for her clinical trial, likely she wouldn't be able to have any help, just as we learned earlier this week that there are 200 people who were turned away from clinical trials, 30 of which were babies and children.
Does the senator agree to so modify his original request?